For millennia, the true story of our origins has been hidden and smothered by tons of stone rubble, hardened mud and dust. We have been wandering the earth blindfolded by the oblivion of the past and resigned to history textbooks, from which we learn very little about what really happened in the planet's remote past, which holds many ancient secrets. And this would continue if men like Erich von Däniken and Zecharia Sitchin hadn't had the courage to expose important questions that pulled many out of the comfortable zone of ignorance. But it all started much earlier. Around 1840, English and French archaeologists made incredible discoveries. In the midst of excavations, they found places, temples, jewels, statues, and royal library of Ashurbanipal II, and inside it, more than 25,000 clay tablets, all of which cuneiform writings. These tablets reported everything: historical texts, poetry, astronomical records, mathematical formulas, commercial contracts, music scores, and so on. The translators of the text also discovered stories of men and gods, which they classified as mythology, as surreal as they seemed to them. However, something greatly intrigued the ancient scholars and discoverers of clay tablets. Many accounts described in them predated biblical Genesis and seemed to be the origin of the sacred text. Many of us grew up indoctrinated by some of the Abrahamic religions, which are distinguished into three standards: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All are monotheistic and conceive of the God's sacred text as the universal God and creator of all things, and all explain the origin of man from a mold of clay made by the hands of God himself. The biblical tale goes on to say that after his creation, man was put in the garden hunting, swimming, sleeping, eating, and getting fat. Back in Eden, children were called by the names they received from their test tube parents. The boy was called Adamu, or red as the clay of the earth, and the girl Tiamat, the mother of life. They formed the first Adam and Eve couple reported in the biblical Genesis, and is the one who was expelled from paradise for having tasted the fruit of knowledge. Adamu and Tiamat, as well as their clones, were sterile by birth. As they were hybrids, the cunning serpent who bore the fruit for Eve was the brilliant scientist who conducted the entire experiment from the beginning. Enki, the Sumerian god of knowledge, Enlil, called the Lord of Command, leader of the Earth mission, expelled the couple from the Garden of Eden, and who did so disgusted by the direction genetic experiment was taking, and what was supposed to be disposable now had the power to multiply. His fear was that the creature had also been given the long life of the gods. This in the long run would pose potential danger to the outnumbered Elohim in earth. But it was too late. The reality was there for all to see, appreciate, and enjoy. All that remained was to go ahead with the plans to mine the gold, to make all the effort and all the sacrifice worth perhaps never being able to return home. Enlil, with his typical military strategic mind, will look for a way to try and eliminate the new species at an opportune time and cleanse the earth of the wrong done. At that moment, he had decided to accept the fate had imposed. But he didn't want to see the bizarre terrestrial couple in front of him. He said to Enki, "Take them away, you treacherous serpent," or something like this. Consanguine relationship. Hundreds of years later, the other Adam and Eve couple appeared. These were the parents of Cain and Abel in the book of Genesis. Cro-Magnon man, or archaic Homo sapiens, arose from the cross between the Anunnaki and the descendant of the laboratory-bred specimen. Once again, we will have the interference of the serpent of Eden. Enki realized that with time and constant consanguineous relationships, his precious experiment was somehow regressing to the primitive stage, and so he began to look for a solution to the cause. The recourse was to have himself sexually related with two females descended from Adams and Tiamat. The experiment, conducted amidst vegetation and under the shade of a tree, soon paid off. From the females, offspring were born, a boy and a girl, both hybrids perfected to a higher degree. They were more graceful, intelligent creatures, and though still somewhat rustic, a step before they became what we are today. Enki kept this experience a secret for as long as he could. It told everyone that the new species of terrestrials had arisen naturally in the desert. He named the boy Adapa and the girl Titi. They were raised by himself and his wife, and were loved as children by her. They were taught everything and they learned everything. In fact, it was from Adapa, the scribe, that the genealogy of the terrestrials began to record it. The book of the generations of Adam. At this point, it must make a scientific observation, genetic studies that analyze fossil DNA from Neanderthal women and mitochondrial DNA, which is passed exclusively from mothers to children to both sexes, concluded that we share 2.5% to 4% of the DNA with Neanderthals. Now doing the analysis from the Y chromosome, the researchers have observed that apparently their DNA has not been passed on to the modern humans, which makes sense since here I have been proposing that the owner of the Y chromosome is an Anunnaki. Tablets contain historical texts, poetry, astronomical records, mathematical formulas, commercial contracts, sheet music, and so on. The translators of the text also discovered stories of men and gods, which they classified as mythology. Later it was with the descendants of Adapa, related and had children, the Nephilim, the famous fallen angels, who had nothing of fallen as they did not fall but landed. After the flood, a natural catastrophe and not punishment from God, but one that Enlil knew how to use to try, without success, to exterminate the aberration generated by original sin, which incidentally is nothing more than the genetic experience that occurred in the past. There was a shift in the social behavior pattern between the Anunnaki and the terrestrials. Man was no longer a slave, but from then on, he played a supporting role in the construction of the history of the world. Sumeria, Egypt, India and China appeared. Empires rose and fell, and here we are currently in the middle of the information and technology age. We can better understand what the ancient text said in allegorical language. Currently, without the religious fanaticism that persecuted those who dared to think, we can understand that the Bible does not speak of God, the creator of everything, who remains inscrutable to the human mind, but of extraterrestrials who, venturing into space, found and colonized the earth and created the Homo sapiens. Today, that we no longer need to prove ourselves rational and lucid beings, we can admit that the missing link in the theory of evolution can be easily explained by an alternative theory, but no less rational and logical. Darwin's thesis makes perfect sense, but only up to a point. And the Bible isn't, after all, telling us old wives' tales. The biblical Genesis is only a summary of much older Mesopotamian text. But putting the Hebrew text to one side, we have several other texts called sacred, spread across the four corners of the world, each one from a different mythology, telling exactly the same story. You change the characters' names, change some details, but the core of the narrative is always the same at some point in Earth's past. God descended from heaven and created man. Is it really just mythology? And what is a mythological narrative if not an attempt to be didactic, explaining complex things by comparative means, in a language that can be understood by those who are not yet ready to understand advanced technology or sophisticated medico-biological procedures? When Sir Henry Layard found Nineveh under rubble and those clay tablets inside the ruins of Ashurbanipal II's library, and when George Smith in 1876 put together his many discoveries in a little book he titled The Chaldean Account of Genesis, and which was the first to compare ancient texts discovered in Mesopotamia with the Bible's tales of creation and the flood. No one knew about or even thought space travel was possible. Zecharia Sitchin could shrewdly see in the intricate allegorical text that something was there, uneasily and silently waiting for the time to understand in the light of space age. Slave to your arrogance nowadays. You just don't see. Who doesn't want to? Modern man is still a slave, but only to his own arrogance, which prevents him from seeing or accepting the obvious. Sumerian mythology, in the form of songs, poems, and sometimes stories that border on autobiographies, if not in fact speaks of the everyday lives of these beings, their jobs, leisure, wars, love, sex, children, parents, grandparents, in an intricate genealogy and a typically patriarchal social structure, but revealing strong women who, always highly respected, interfere or decide a large part when necessary or when they are interested. As for men, they are the ones who lead and occupy the main positions in heaven. Anu, the father of the gods, rules with a strong personality. He established himself as the sovereign of Agade, the capital of the celestial kingdom. His most prominent sons are his legal heir, Enlil, the eldest son Enki, and the wise Ninmah. These three children are the leaders of the so-called Earth mission and form a triangle that reveals a very bold social mentality about love relationships, but nowadays obsolete and incomprehensible by our moral standards, although in Earth's past everything was considered absolutely normal. Enlil, whose epithet is the Lord of Command, was the most important leader on Earth. He spoke and the others obeyed. Full stop. Extremely severe, he accumulates administrative and military functions, and he was the one who pushed the house in order. Enki, whose epithet is the Lord of Earth, is the lead scientist of the genetic experiment that generated the primitive worker. Completely the opposite of Enlil, he is not concerned with the everyday, but with the extraordinary. For him, deciphering the mystery of life is more important than respecting ethics, and time again, we will see him breaking the rules. Besides, he was an incorrigible womanizer. Ninmah, whose epithet is Lady High, was the love disputed by the brothers and the solid pillar on which both Enlil and Enki lean when the going gets tough. She was female wisdom always put to the test, and the womb that brought gods and men into the world. It is the Great Mother, in fact. From Ninmah came the diminutive Mamu, which gave rise to the word mother. Human beings like us, the three led and always together despite the difference, faced all the problems that, by the way, were many and usually caused by their children and grandchildren in dispute related to the throne of Nibiru or the domain of Earth. Among the most outstanding children and grandchildren in this incredible mythology saga are Ninurta, Marduk and Inanna. All others are supporting but no less important. In every respect, they were human beings like us, neither good nor bad, but with every right to right and wrong, and they messed up a lot. But his successes were also many. By our current standards, the Anunnaki are considered perverse and immoral beings because of their incestuous relationships between siblings and between parents and children, or grandparents and grandchildren, which is a cause of scandal or deep catharsis for many who study the subject. Although this was always present in the stories reported by the Bible and accepted almost without questioning, being enough for that an explanation, even unconvincing for such behavior, as in the case of Lot's daughters, who believing themselves to be the last people on earth, got drunk with wine and they seduced their own father and begat offspring. In fact, the Anunnaki are by nature amoral, but for them, the incestuous relationship was normal from their home planet. Sex was highly encouraged, lived, enjoyed, and valued, and it didn't burden anyone's shoulders or mind with feelings of guilt or ideas of sin or something dirty and indecent. The Anunnaki definitely didn't need a sex therapist. In this respect, they were free, light, and loose, as well as we all should be. In Sumerian society, rights and duties were equal for everyone, men and women, and the Sumerians had a very intense and overly explicit sex life. The abundance of erotic poems found in Ashurbanipal II's library reveals a very liberal and well-resolved society on this issue, reflection of the social and sexual life of the gods. Very cold at the same time that we perceive them as bellicose and frighteningly cold. These gods are spiritualized, although the way they see and treat spirituality is very different from the way we see and react to this more subtle reality, with which is still we don't know how to deal properly, as we have been indoctrinated for millennia within a matrix called religion. The Anunnaki attach importance to dreams, visions and omens, and always wonder about fate and luck, fate being unchanging and luck we make ourselves. And yes, the Anunnaki believe in God. They call him the creator of all. But it is not very clear whether they perceive God as an entity or as a creative force in the universe. And there are times when they seem to mix the concepts. If they have a religion, we can call it a cosmic religion, and it has a lot more to do with astronomy than with the subservient model that we have been subjected to through blind faith and tailor-made dogmas to make us sheep of the system. How did such a big leap come about from Neanderthals, who emerged relatively so recently? We have beings closer to him with few differences, like Homo heidelbergensis, which appeared 600 to 700,000 years ago in Africa. Although the Anunnaki show respect with a supposedly universal hierarchy, they do not seem to submit to any religious dogma nor to the feelings of guilt and sin. They are extremely rational. Each of them has knowledge in several areas. They are not like us, who have so little time to live and need to quickly and assertively choose the path we are going to take, the college we are going to attend, the area in which we are going to specialize, the profession we are going to pursue. Life for us is a breath. They already have all the time in the world. They know everything, but they specialize in what they like to do the most. Enlil is a military engineer, Enki is a geneticist, and loves astronomy. Are the Anunnaki reptilians? This is the most frequent question I have found in people who are interested in the subject. Unfortunately, the internet is full of disinformation professionals. Thousands of blogs doubt this completely erroneous idea. There are also scholars on the subject who raise the hypothesis that Zecharia Sitchin would have covered up the true nature of the Anunnaki, but numerous serious studies of symbology can explain this huge misunderstanding when interpreting Mesopotamian texts, pictograms, and images. In Sumerian mythology, there were two distinct clans of gods, Enlil and Enki. Just as Enlil's clan was usually represented by the symbol of the bull animal, so Enki's was represented by the symbol of the snake animal. We see the serpent or dragon in many sculptures and illustrations from the ancient world, but we also see in the same proportion many illustrations, reliefs, and sculptures featuring a bull as a highlight. But I have never seen any scholars hypothesizing that the Anunnaki were bovine. But we did not just have the bull and the serpent representing the different gods, we also had the falcon, the ram, and the lion. In many cultures, we see these astronauts being depicted with the animal faces, often appearing not to be actually part of the god's face, but rather attached to it. As the biblical Genesis says, they made us in their image and likeness. Now stop to think, if we were made in their image and likeness, and we have no reptiles, obviously the Anunnaki are not the reptilians of the conspiracy theories. But what about the reptilian brain? Well, it's just the unfortunate name a scientist gave to the most primitive part of our brain, responsible for our attack and defense reactions, our ability and instinct for survival, nothing else. But the triune brain theory, formulated by Paul MacLean, walk on Earth, the reptilian brains, basal brain, or even our complex is formed only by the spinal cord and the basal portions of the forebrain. This first level of brain organization is the part of the brain to be formed first in the fetus and is only capable of promoting simple reflexes, which occurs in reptiles, hence the name. It was just a way to compare. The human being is very complex as it has all the levels of evolution that simple mammals do not have. And by that I don't mean at any time that in the remote past we were reptiles, or not even at the beginning of the formation of life on this planet, when primitive forms came out of the water to walk on Earth. I am saying that we are extremely advanced organisms that go far beyond the simple system found in less complex animals evolved on Earth. It is understandable that dragons and serpents have always aroused greater interest in people than oxen. So taking a figure that people fear and turning it into a conspiracy theory that generates curiosity and fear is much more profitable than telling the story as it is. And look, the story of the Anunnaki doesn't need anything but itself to be fantastic. Curiosity about the true appearance of the Anunnaki grows more and more, but in fact, archaeological discoveries for a long time are bringing to light many skeletons that, despite the similarity, truly do not compare of those of Earth's humans. These discoveries have been hidden from the public eye since the 1950s and are only now making a comeback. The most conceptual reference we have about the appearances of the extraterrestrials that colonized the Earth comes from Mesopotamian reliefs and statues. It turns out that these images are not Anunnaki. They are artistic representations of them, in keeping with the image and likeness of the Arab, Armenian, and Semitic people. And by the way, most of these reliefs are depicting terrestrial humans, kings, and soldiers, and also the Greek statues that stimulate the gods do not correspond to their true appearances, but to those of the people who inhabited the Mediterranean islands. This can be said of the representation of the gods and all other world mythologies. We should try to imagine the Anunnaki as beings from a hyper-icy planet, taking into account the supposed huge distance from the sun. Therefore, no melanin and extremely light eyes, not necessarily blue. The truth is, we don't know what they look like. All we have are clues, like the one that describes Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerican culture as a white man with a white beard. Our origin on Earth. The theory about the Anunnaki is wonderful and incredibly coherent, but if we want to eliminate the extraterrestrial factor as an explanation for our origin on Earth, we will have to accept another very interesting and very likely theory, that we are always going through cycles of extinction and going back to primitive stages. having to go through millennia to conquer again the same technology we once had in the past. The point is that even with the knowledge we have today, it must be embarrassing for our smartest engineers and architects to look at ancient megalithic buildings with stone blocks weighing impressive and impossible tons for our contemporary machines, and whose purpose and function they are true riddles not yet deciphered, not to mention entire cities dug straight into the rock. We are intending to travel to the other planets, but we barely know the bottom of the sea. With all our space technology, our knowledge does not yet understand and encompass all the mysteries of our world. In fact, it may be more interesting to accept extraterrestrial interference than to reject it, which would imply having to seek coherent answers to another ton of questions about the Earth's and humanity's past, which are easily answered when we consider the factor Anunnaki after the flood. After the flood, the Anunnaki reflected on their mission on this planet, primarily in search of gold to save the atmosphere of their home planet Nibiru, and they also reflected on the purpose of man's creation. From there, they would begin to prepare the terrestrials to inherit the earth. They divided the lands into habitable regions, built cities for time, anointed kings to represent the people before the Anunnaki, gave civic and moral laws that were later interpreted as being religious. Science still doesn't have all the answers. Here and there, a newborn of some ancestor, modern man is discovered in a place that escapes academic common sense. More and more questions are raised, new possibilities are explored. They taught everything that man needed to move forward: mathematics, geometry, medicine, music, sports, literature, law, and arts. They gave deep notions of personal hygiene and basic sanitation to the cities, lessons in commerce, bartering and sales, marriage and divorce laws, orphan protection laws, etc. Modern man was no longer a Lulu. He was a supporting cast in every happening on planet Earth. He was a king, priest, teacher, father of the family, soldier, general. He fought alongside the Anunnaki in wars provoked, now by the gods, now by the men. Some men felt they no longer needed the gods and decided to face them by invading sacred territories. Sacred because they were the domain of the Anunnaki alone, such as the spaceport of Mount Sinai. The gods tried to stop the insurgency with quite violent methods, dropping so-called weapons of terror, perhaps nuclear bombs, on the so-called sinful cities. We see, for example, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, mentioned in the Bible, and Mohenjo-daro in Hindu legends. Many departed from Earth, the episode and revolt and punishment put to an end to Sumerian civilization, and also to the will of the gods to remain on our side. Many left, leaving Earth. Some stayed and continued, like Marduk, who had close ties to earthly humanity when marrying an Earth woman, a Cro-Magnon. She was Sarpanet, the daughter of the Enki, the biblical Enoch. But others have also married Earth women, and it can no longer be said that the generations arising from these relationships are the same as those of primitive workers, the primordial Lulus. So when I see in many blogs, books and study groups about the Anunnaki comments like "we are cattle," "we are Lulus," "we were created for slavery," "we were manipulated by evil and cruel beings," and so on, I realized that there was a misunderstanding of the ancient texts brought to light through the studies of Zecharia Sitchin, or even a tendency towards victimization, very common today. All I have to say is let go of the past. Forgive me, lift your head and move on. You are no longer a Lulu. You and I are not the first primitive worker. We are blessed beings that emerging crookedly we become advanced beings, spiritualized, intelligent, capable of conquering worlds, just as our creators did in the past, colonizing our planet. We have earned our place in the universe, but we still need to learn how to deal with it. The Anunnaki made us in their images and likeness, and we generally boil that phrase down to the physical aspect. We understand that we were created in an image similar to that of the Anunnaki, and that's it. However, the meaning is broader. In the experience that brought Homo sapiens into the world, Enki, Ninursag, and Ninshizida, some of the most important leaders represent in the Earth mission, made splendid combinations in our DNA. There is a passage in the clay tablet text referring to the creation of Adamu, where Ninursag, a little drunk and cheerful, philosophizes how good and how bad can I make man. Anyway, the Anunnaki made us equal to them in all but one respect: longevity. We do not eat from the tree of life, therefore the eternal life of the gods was not given to us. This is something we will have to conquer, and we are not far from it. Our technology and medicine are advancing by leaps and bounds, hitting, and like the Anunnaki, many reveal the same way of thinking, feeling and acting. Like the Anunnaki, we love, hate, laugh and cry, feel physical pain and mental anguish, feel sexual desire, passion, suffer for love, and rejoice in a child's smile. Like our creators, we feel fear, courage, ambition, tenderness. We plan and execute a project anyway. We choose what seems to be the best way. We make decisions, wrong and right. We build and destroy, and we are ingenious. And also like them, we promote war and peace. In everything we are to their images and similarities. May man remember that he is also God, or if it isn't already, it will become one. For better or for worse, we will fulfill our cosmic role. We are starting an adventure through space, and in time we will conquer worlds. Over time we will create other beings to our images and similarities. And yes, our motives will be as selfish as the Anunnaki were. After all, God rides straight with crooked lines. Goes the popular saying, growing up hurts, and the future will repeat the past. It is the evolutionary process from sphere to sphere, the ladder to heaven. It seems strange, the idea of being descendants of aliens so different from who we are, and how we understand ourselves as a civilization, with behavioral patterns that diverge and geography changes, and that we never stop to think about why. What for the West is a scandal, for the East is normal. We just need to understand that even now we are the result of a society that once functioned differently, governed by rules from another world, a world far away from here. Free will, things are still changing, which is why we are living in an era so much conflict about all of this. But little by little we are creating our own world, our way of seeing things and dealing with them. We were made in the image and likeness of the Anunnaki, but we don't necessarily need to follow them in the steps. That's what free will is for anyway. We are at a point of planetary revolution, where defining what our society will be like in the future is part of our responsibility as we define what is right and what is wrong for us, collectively assuming us as a single planetary race. And this has nothing to do with the New World Order, Illuminati, Bilderberg, Bohemian Club, hidden government and other various institutions mentioned in conspiracy theories, but with the real need to define and present itself as a cosmic nation before other interplanetary peoples. This is inevitable.
If you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing to us and hitting the like button. Feel free to write a comment below and suggest which theory you want to see next. If you'd like to further support this channel, please consider joining. Our membership link will be found in the description box below. We appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for watching.